Reeves grabbed Sloane's wrist and yanked her backward, hard enough that she stumbled and shoved himself between her and the Barrett case like she was a child reaching for a loaded gun. "Don't you ever put your hands near that rifle again." His voice dropped into something uglier than a shout. "You're a medic. You carry bandages. You wipe blood off floors. That's all you're worth in this room." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And Commander Marcus Shepard, standing in the back arms, crossed jaw tight, watched Sloane Garrett absorb that blow without flinching. That was when he knew something the rest of the room didn't. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Armory at Naval Special Warfare Command's Yuma, Arizona facility was not a place designed for comfort. It was a place designed for discipline. The fluorescent lights were unforgiving. The air smelled like gun oil and rust and something harder to name, the particular metallic scent of serious purpose. The kind of room where you didn't speak unless spoken to, and you didn't touch unless authorized, and authorization in this building was a word that carried weight heavier than the weapons themselves. Petty Officer First Class Sloane Garrett had been inside dozens of armories across her 9-year career in the Navy Medical Corps. She'd walked through rooms like this the same way she walked through everything head level shoulders, square eyes forward. She was a combat medic, a good one of the best her commanding officers had ever put in a report. She'd pulled men out of situations that no medical training manual had ever prepared anyone for. She'd kept hearts beating in the middle of firefights. She'd made decisions under pressure that surgeons in fully equipped operating rooms would have struggled with. But she'd never been supposed to be in this room, not this particular room, not this armory, and certainly not standing in front of that case. It was the Barrett M82A1. She knew it the moment she saw it, even before the case was fully open, even before the overhead light caught the length of that barrel. She knew it the way you know a voice you haven't heard in 15 years instantly in your bones before your brain has even processed the information. Her breath changed, just slightly, just enough that she noticed it herself and hated that she noticed it. Impressive, isn't it? The voice came from behind her, and it wasn't a question. Commander Marcus Shepard walked past her shoulder and stopped at the case, arms crossed, studying the weapon with the flat expression of a man who had lived next to instruments of death long enough that they no longer performed any drama for him. He was 52 years old, built like something quarried rather than born, with a face that had been weathered into angles by 3 decades of deployments to places most Americans couldn't find on a map. He had the kind of stillness that only comes from having been in enough situations where movement got people killed. "Barrett M82A1, he said. "Anti-material rifle, semi-automatic. Effective range of 1,800 meters in the right hands." He paused. "And we have exactly 1 set of right hands assigned to it in this unit." Sloane said nothing. She was looking at the rifle. Shepard turned his head. He looked at her looking at it, and something shifted in his expression, not much but enough. A slight narrowing of the eyes, the way a man looks when he notices something that doesn't fit the pattern he expected. "You know what it is," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Careful and precise, the way everything about Shepard was careful and precise. "It's a .50 caliber, she said. Her voice was even, professional. "Anti-material platform, .50 BMG round, rotating bolt system, recoil operated, effective against light armor, fortified positions, and hardened targets at extended range." She stopped, then quieter. "My father had a picture of one on his wall when I was 7. Shepard looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Your father was military." "Master Sergeant Cole Garrett," she said. "Delta Force, 18th Special Forces, Group Sniper." Something moved across Shepard's face. Not recognition, not quite. Something more like recalibration. "Cole Garrett," he repeated. "You knew him." "I knew of him," Shepard said. His record was substantial. He looked back at the rifle. "When did he pass Kunar Province?" she said. 2009. The silence that followed was the kind that neither of them tried to fill. It had a shape to it, a specific gravity. Shepard had attended enough memorial services to know what grief looked like when it had been compressed by years into something dense and unshakable. And what he saw on Sloane Garrett's face was not fresh pain. It was old pain. The kind that has been carried so long the person carrying it has forgotten what it felt like to put it down. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. Thank you, sir. She took one step back from the case, as if correcting herself for having gotten too close. Her posture tightened back into the professional geometry she'd walked in with. I was just doing the inventory walkthrough with Chief Danvers, she said, for the medical kit positioning relative to the weapon stations. Protocol for the Sultan Ridge pre-deployment checklist. I know what you were doing, Shepard said. He closed the case not roughly but with a quiet finality. And now you've done it. She nodded, turned to leave. Garrett, she stopped. You look at that rifle like you know it. She didn't turn back around. She stood with her back to him, and for just a fraction of a second, barely visible, barely there, her shoulders tightened. I'm a medic, sir, she said. I don't know rifles. And she walked out. Shepard stood alone in the armory for a long moment looking at the closed case. He had been reading people for 30 years. In interrogation rooms, in jungles, and mountain passes, in the backs of military transport planes at 2 in the morning. And in 30 years, he had learned one thing above all others. The people who tell you what they are, the ones who make a point of naming themselves before you can name them, are almost always telling you exactly what they're afraid you'll see. He picked up his radio. Chief Danvers. Sir? Pull the personnel file on Petty Officer Garrett. Full background. Service record, family history, the works. I want it on my desk before chow. A pause. Is there a problem, Commander? Shepard looked at the case. I don't know yet, he said. Schmoz. 3 days before Operation Sultan Ridge, the Yuma facility was operating at the particular pitch of controlled chaos that preceded any significant deployment. People moved faster in the hallways. Voices in the briefing rooms were sharper. The weight of what was coming hadn't landed yet, but everyone could feel it approaching the way desert animals feel a storm in the pressure in the air, in something below the frequency of sound. Sloan was in the medical bay running through her kit for the 4th time that week. Not because she'd forgotten anything, she hadn't. She ran through it 4 times because 4 times was the number that made her feel like she hadn't forgotten anything, and there was a difference, and she understood the difference, and she respected it. Saline bags, tourniquets, hemostatic dressings, needle decompression kits, airways, blood products, suture sets. She moved through the inventory the way a musician runs scales, not thinking, just checking, just maintaining the connection between her hands and her knowledge, so that when the moment came and thinking was a luxury she couldn't afford, her hands would still know what to do. The door opened behind her. Nice kit. She didn't turn around immediately. She recognized the voice, Lieutenant Commander Reeves. 45 years old, 12 years in naval special warfare, the kind of officer who had mistaken the confidence that came from his rank for the kind that had to be earned through something harder. Thank you, sir, she said, still working. How many times you checked that thing? 4, sir. 4. She could hear the smirk in it. You know, I've been in this unit for 6 years. I don't think we've ever had a medic count her saline bags 4 times. She turned around then. Not because she was angry, she wasn't, not quite, but because she'd learned a long time ago that the only thing worse than letting someone dismiss you was letting them dismiss you while your back was turned. With respect, sir, she said, on my last deployment in Helmand Province, we lost a corpsman because a saline bag had a microscopic puncture that nobody caught during pre-mission check. Patient died from air embolism 40 minutes into treatment. I checked 4 times. Reeves looked at her. He had the particular expression of a man who had been handed an answer he didn't want and wasn't sure whether to be impressed or more dismissive. He chose more dismissive. Helmand was Helmand, he said. Sultan Ridge is a different operational environment. Your job on this one is clean, ride the convoy, keep the bodies breathing, stay out of the way. Shepard's pulling Alvarez for the sniper assignment. You don't need to worry about anything except your bandages. He glanced at the kit. Count 'em a 5th time if it makes you feel better. He left. Sloan stood there for a moment, the hemostatic dressing still in her hand. She set it down carefully. Then she picked it back up and finished the check. 5 times, she decided. 5 times felt right. She found out about Alvarez that evening. Petty Officer 2nd Class Diego Alvarez was the unit's designated marksman. 28 years old, out of Texas, the kind of quiet that was its own form of loudness. When he spoke, people listened because he so rarely bothered. He was the best shooter in the unit, possibly the best she'd seen since she didn't finish that thought. She passed him in the hallway outside the briefing room. He was walking with a slight favor to his left leg, something she'd noticed 3 days ago and had been cataloging in the back of her mind with the automatic clinical attention she applied to everyone around her. Alvarez, she said. He stopped, nodded. Garrett, you're walking different, she said. Left hip, 3 days now. He looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite defensive and wasn't quite grateful. I'm fine, he said. When's the last time you took your boot off and looked at it? A pause. Last week. Take your boot off and look at it, she said. Garrett, I'm not writing a report, she said. I'm not flagging you. I'm telling you to take your boot off and look at whatever's going on with that hip socket, because we deploy in 3 days. And if there's something wrong with your left side, I want to know before we're 80 miles into the Mojave, not after. He studied her for a moment. Then, with the careful motion of a man who had been trying not to call attention to something, he leaned against the wall and showed her. The bruising was extensive, deep purple spreading from the hip socket down across the iliotibial band. Old injury stress, aggravated, the kind that comes from repeated impact over time, and then one sudden movement that takes it past the threshold. She kept her face professional. How long, she said. 3 weeks. And you didn't report it because I'm the sniper on Sultan Ridge, he said. Flat, simple. The statement of someone who understood that to report the injury was to remove himself from the mission, and to remove himself from the mission was to leave 17 of his teammates without long-range support in a kill zone. She understood. She didn't agree, but she understood. You need to tell Shepard, she said. Garrett, I'm not going to do it for you, she said. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you need to tell him. Because if that hip locks up while you're on a ridge with a Barrett in your hands and people depending on your shot. She stopped. Let him finish the sentence himself. He looked at the floor. I'll wrap it, he said. Brace it, it'll hold. She looked at him for a long moment. In 9 years, she had learned the difference between the things that hold and the things that feel like they'll hold, and they are not the same, and in the space between them, people die. Take the anti-inflammatories from the med bay tonight, she said quietly. Wrap it properly before you sleep. Ice in the morning. And if it's worse tomorrow, you tell Shepard. Those aren't suggestions. He nodded. Something in his expression, some knot of pride and fear and stubbornness, shifted into something closer to gratitude. You're not what I expected, he said. Nobody ever is, she said, and kept walking. That night, alone in the barracks, Sloane sat on the edge of her bunk and did the thing she did before every deployment. She took out the photograph. It was a 4x6 print worn soft at the corners from handling. Her father was in it. He was younger than she ever really thought of him, 34. In this picture, though she hadn't known that at the time, had just known him as her father, which meant he was simply the largest thing in her world. The fixed point everything else orbited. He was standing in the Arizona desert, their desert, 20 miles outside of Flagstaff, with a rifle in his hands and the afternoon sun dropping long shadows behind him. Not a Barrett, a Remington 700 in this one, his training rifle, the one he'd used to teach her. She had been 11 years old the first time he let her fire it. She could still feel the exact weight of it, the specific pressure of the stock against her shoulder, the way he'd stood behind her, not touching, just present his voice quiet and even, and completely serious in the way that told her he wasn't talking to a child anymore. Wind's coming from the northwest, he'd said. You feel it. Yes? Tell me what it's doing. She'd thought about it. It's pushing left to right, consistent, maybe 8-9 miles an hour. Good. Now where does that move your point of aim? Right, she'd said. I compensate left. How much? She'd done the calculation in her head, the way he'd taught her distance, velocity, bullet weight, wind speed, the slight curve of the earth at extended range. She'd been 11. She'd calculated it in her head in 14 seconds. About 4 inches at this distance, she'd said. A pause. Then 3.5, but close enough. You're thinking right. Now slow your breathing down. Don't hold it. Breathe through it. Let the moment find you. She'd fired. The round went where she'd aimed it. Not perfectly, but close. Close enough that her father had been quiet for a moment, in the particular way that meant he was deciding whether to be proud or to push for more. He'd done both the way he always did both. Good, he'd said. Now do it again. And this time, find the stillness before you squeeze. You rushed it. The rifle knows when you rush it. She set the photograph down. 3.5 inches. At 300 yards, 14 seconds of mental calculation. She'd been 11 years old. She wondered sometimes what it said about her that the clearest memory of her childhood wasn't Christmas morning or her first day of school or any of the things other people saved in amber for their nostalgia. The clearest memory was the weight of a rifle and her father's voice and the strange, fierce satisfaction of putting a round within 4 inches of a 3.5-inch correction at 300 yards. It said something. She wasn't always sure what. She turned off the light. The morning of the briefing, everything was professional and contained and moving at the correct pace until Lieutenant Commander Reeves opened the Sultan Ridge operational folder and started assigning role positions. Shepard sat at the back of the room. He always sat at the back. It was a habit he'd told her once in a brief exchange during a supply run that you could read a room better from behind it than from the front. He was reading it now. Primary Medical, Reeves said, not looking up from the folder. Petty Officer Garrett. Rides the second vehicle, maintains kit accessibility, responds to trauma calls, does not engage. Standard medic protocol. Sloan noted the does not engage and said nothing. Primary Sniper, Reeves continued. Petty Officer Alvarez. She looked at Alvarez. He was sitting very straight, the kind of straight that hurts. Sir, Sloan said. Every head turned. Reeves looked up from the folder with an expression that suggested speaking without being addressed was in his experience as something that medics did not do. What he said, Petty Officer Alvarez has a soft tissue injury to the left hip socket, she said. Her voice was even. Professional, not apologetic. He's been managing it for 3 weeks. My assessment is that the injury is stress aggravated and has a meaningful probability of compromising mobility under field conditions, particularly in elevated terrain. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room full of people deciding what they're allowed to feel. Alvarez didn't look at her. He was looking straight ahead, and something in his jaw was very tight. Reeves put the folder down. Petty Officer Alvarez, he said, you have something to report. A beat. Then no, sir. I'm fit for duty. He told me last night, Sloan said. He asked me not to say anything. Then why are you saying it, Reeves said. Because if his hip locks on a ridgeline during an active engagement, you lose your sniper support at the moment you need it most, she said. And I'd rather have this conversation in a briefing room than make that call in the field. Reeves looked at her for a long moment with an expression that could have been any number of things, and none of them were friendly. Medical recommendation, he said. Restricted weight bearing on uneven terrain, she said, which means elevated positions are a risk. I'd recommend a secondary assessment before. He says he's fit for duty, Reeves has said. We take his word for it. He's the operator, you're the medic. Stay in your lane, Garrett. She nodded. Yes, sir. But she caught Shepard's eyes from across the room as she sat back down. He was watching her with that same careful, calculating stillness she'd seen in the armory. Like a man adding a column of numbers and arriving at an answer he hadn't expected. The night before deployment, Sloan went back to the armory. She had authorization. She had medical kit positioning protocols to verify equipment staging to confirm it was legitimate, documented, exactly the kind of thing a thorough combat medic did the night before going into the field. There was nothing unusual about her being there. She stood in front of the Barrett's case for 43 seconds. She knew because she counted. She didn't open it. She didn't touch it. She just stood there, and in the stillness of that room with the fluorescent light humming and the smell of gun oil in the air, she let herself remember the weight of it. Not this one, never this one, but the class of it, the feel of it, the specific gravity of that kind of instrument in hands that had been trained to understand it. Her father's voice. The rifle doesn't know who you are, he'd told her once when she was 16 and had asked him if it ever scared him. It doesn't care about your rank or your name or what you believe. It only knows what you ask of it. The question is never whether you can shoot. The question is whether you've earned the right to decide when. She put her hand on the case, just for a second, just the heel of her palm against the cool metal. Then she took it away, picked up her medical inventory checklist, and went back to work. In the hallway outside, Commander Shepard stood in the shadows where he'd been for the last 3 minutes, watching through the narrow window in the armory door. He had read her file that afternoon, every word of it. He had made several phone calls. including one to a retired Delta Force sergeant major who had served alongside Cole Garrett, and who, when Shepard described the woman he was looking at, had gone very quiet and then said, "You don't want to know how well Cole trained that girl, Commander. You just want to pray that if it ever matters, she's on your side." Shepard walked away from the door. Tomorrow they were driving into the Mojave. And he had a feeling, the deep, wordless animal feeling that had kept him alive for 30 years, in places where being wrong meant you didn't come back, that something was going to happen out there that none of their planning accounted for. He wasn't afraid of it. He was afraid of being wrong about her. And he was almost never wrong about people. The convoy briefing was at 0500. Sloan was already there at 0445, sitting in the third row, her medical kit staged and inventoried and staged again. She didn't sleep well before deployments. She hadn't slept well before deployments in 9 years, and she had stopped pretending that was going to change. She used the hours instead. Reviewed trauma protocols, ran scenarios in her head, asked herself the questions she hoped nobody would ask her in the field, so she'd already have the answers ready when they did. The room filled around her, operators, crew chiefs, support personnel. The particular controlled energy of people who have done this enough times that fear has been compressed into focus. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody joked. Even the ones who joked on every other morning understood that the morning of deployment was not that morning. Alvarez came in and sat 2 rows ahead of her. She watched him lower himself into the chair. He was careful about it. Too careful. The kind of careful that looks like nothing to someone who isn't paying attention and like everything to someone who is. She looked at his left side. Worse than yesterday? She wrote nothing down, said nothing, held the knowledge the way she held every piece of clinical information she collected, quietly, completely ready to use. Reeves came in at 4:58 and stood at the front of the room like a man who had been waiting all morning to be the largest thing in it. "Listen up," he said. "Sultan Ridge is a 47-mile convoy route through a section of the Mojave that Intel has flagged as low threat. I want to emphasize low threat, not no threat. We're transporting equipment to a forward staging area, and we are coming back. This is not a combat operation. This is a logistics run with a security element." He looked around the room. Questions? Sloan had a question. She did not ask it. The question was, if intelligence flagged this route as low threat, why had she spent the last 3 days noticing that every senior NCO in the building had been quietly adjusting their personal weapon loadouts? She filed it, kept her face neutral, watched Shepard, who was standing at the side of the room again, never at the front, always at the side, and saw that he was watching Reeves with an expression that gave away exactly nothing, which itself told her something. "Mount up at 0530, Reeves said. "Any injuries, complaints, or concerns?" He didn't look at Sloan, which was its own way of looking at Sloan. "Go through your chain of command before we roll." Not after, before. He left the podium, and the room exhaled. Petty Officer Torres, a 26-year-old from Albuquerque who ran communications and had the unofficial job of saying out loud the things everyone else was thinking, leaned over to Sloan and said quietly, "He said low threat. Why do I feel like I need an extra magazine?" "Gut instinct is data," Sloan said. "Don't ignore it." Torres looked at her. "That's either very reassuring or very terrifying." "It's both," she said. "Pack the extra magazine." Timestamp 8 minutes. She found Alvarez outside the motor pool at 0515, doing a weapons check against the rear bumper of the second vehicle. "How's the hip?" she said. He didn't look up. "Fine." "How's the hip?" she said again, same tone, no variation. He paused, looked at her sideways. "It's manageable." Manageable means it's not fine. Manageable means I'm here and I'm doing my job, Garrett. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Alvarez, I'm not your enemy. I'm the person who's going to be responsible for keeping you alive out there if something goes wrong. I need an honest number. 1 to 10. He was quiet for a second. His jaw moved. 6, he said. 6 was bad. 6 on a flat surface was 7 on uneven ground and 8 on a ridgeline, and 9 the moment he had to hold a firing position for more than 90 seconds. She did that math in about 2 seconds and didn't let any of it reach her face. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He looked at her like he was expecting an argument. "You've made your call," she said. "I've made mine. We both know what we're doing and what it costs. Just don't lie to me in the field." Whatever happens out there, I need you to tell me the truth when I ask you a question. Can you do that? Something in his face shifted. The stubbornness didn't go away. It was built too deep for that, but underneath it, something loosened slightly. Yeah, he said, I can do that. She nodded, went back to her vehicle. Behind her, she didn't see the way he watched her walk away. Something between respect and the particular discomfort of being understood more precisely than you wanted to be. Mini climax 11 minutes. The convoy rolled at 05:33, 3 minutes behind schedule, which Reeves noted over comms in a tone that made clear he considered 3 minutes of personal failure on the part of the universe. Sloan rode in Vehicle 2, a hardened transport with Torres on comms, and a crew chief named Weston, who had the specific quality of stillness that either meant extreme competence or total disengagement, and who turned out over the next 40 minutes of desert driving to be extremely competent. The Mojave in the early morning had a quality to it that she had never been able to describe to anyone who hadn't been in it, a particular flat clarity, a light that felt like it was coming from everywhere at once, a silence that wasn't really silence but a spectrum of small sounds that the brain registered as quiet because none of them were human. She'd grown up with this desert. She knew its registers. She knew the difference between the way it sounded when nothing was happening and the way it sounded when something was about to. She was listening to it now through the gap in the armored window, and it sounded like the second one. Torres, she said. Yeah. What are your comms readings? He checked. Clean. Traffic on the primary frequency, nothing unusual on, he stopped. What? She said. Secondary frequency just spiked. Interference pattern and could be equipment, could be flag it to Shepard. Reeves' command on this. Flag it to Shepard, she said with enough quiet certainty that Torres stopped debating it and reached for his radio. In Vehicle 1, Shepard received the flag. He looked out his window at the terrain rolling past and said nothing for exactly 4 seconds. Then he keyed his radio. All vehicles, this is Shepard. Increase following distance. Eyes on the high ground. Reeves came back almost immediately. Commander, this is a low-threat route. No need to increase the following distance, Lieutenant Commander. Flat, final. The voice of a man who had stopped explaining himself about 20 years ago. A pause. Copy, Reeves said with a tone that made clear he was copying under protest. Sloan felt the vehicle slow slightly as the spacing between them and Vehicle 1 widened. She kept listening to the desert. Timestamp 18 minutes, twist 1 approaching. 31 minutes into the route, Alvarez's voice came over comms from Vehicle 3. I've got movement on the North Ridge, 200 meters, possibly 3. The convoy did not stop. Stopping was the wrong call on an open route, and everyone in every vehicle knew it. Nature of movement, as Shepard said, can't confirm yet, could be. The RPG hit Vehicle 1. Not an explosion like in the movies, not a cinematic bloom of fire and silence. The real thing was percussive and immediate in total a pressure wave that hit Sloan's chest like a fist before the sound even fully registered. And then the sound arrived and it was enormous. And then the comms exploded with voices and she was already moving. Contact Northridge RPG Vehicle 1 is hit. Casualties, I need casualty count. Comms are down, primary frequency is. This is Shepard, all personnel dismount and take cover, do not. I've got 2 more shooters on the South Ridge, we're flanked. Sloan was out of the vehicle before Weston finished braking. She didn't think about it. Her body had its own protocol for this moment, and it ran without her permission. Kit in hand, crouched low, moving toward Vehicle 1, reading the terrain for the fastest covered route. Garrett, Weston shouted. Garrett, you stay with the... She was already gone. Mini climax 22 minutes. Vehicle 1 had taken the RPG on the front left quarter. The crew chief in the front seat was unconscious and bleeding from the head scalp laceration, significant but survivable. The operator in the right rear had a punctured eardrum from the blast concussion and was disoriented but mobile. The driver had a broken left arm compound, the bone visible, and was somehow still trying to operate his radio with his right hand. Stop, she said, and put her hand over his. Stop, let me look at you. You're not fine, she said. You have a compound fracture of the radius. Stop moving that arm. She had the driver stabilize in 90 seconds. Tourniquet above the fracture, immobilized, moved to the protected side of the vehicle. She was back at the crew chief when the second RPG hit Vehicle 3. The percussion of it reached her as a physical force. She pressed herself against the metal and counted 1, 2, then raised her head. Vehicle 3 was smoking. Not burning, not yet, but the driver's side was compromised, and she could see figures moving. Alvarez. She looked for him automatically, the way your eyes go to a specific face in a crowd before you've decided to look for it. She found him 20 meters from the vehicle on the ground, dragging himself toward a boulder with one arm. His left side wasn't working, the hip. She started toward him, and a round hit the ground 18 inches to her left, and she dropped flat and pressed herself into the dirt and listened to the shooting above her, disciplined, coordinated, coming from 2 positions on the north ridge and at least 1 on the south. This was not a chance encounter. This was a prepared ambush. These people had known the route. She filed that information in the same place she filed everything, quietly, completely, and got back up and moved. Timestamp 27 minutes. Major climax building. She reached Alvarez behind the boulder. He was conscious and furious and pale. Hip, she said. Hip's locked, he said through his teeth. Completely locked. I can't. He stopped. Something crossed his face that wasn't pain. It was worse than pain. It was the specific look of a man who has just realized that the thing he told himself would hold has not held, and that people are going to die because of it. The Barrett, he said. Don't. Garrett, the Barrett is on the North Ridge support vehicle. If someone doesn't get up there, and a burst of fire cut over their heads, and they both pressed against the rock. When it passed, the shooters have elevated positions. They've got coverage on the entire convoy floor. Nobody can move down here. It's a kill box. You understand what I'm saying? It's a designed kill box, and the only way out of it is to neutralize those elevated positions, and I cannot climb that ridge with a locked hip. She already knew everything he was telling her. She had known it approximately 90 seconds after the first RPG hit, the way you know the answer to a math problem before you've written out the steps because you've been doing the math your whole life. She looked up at the North Ridge. 80 meters, rocky terrain. Open exposure for the first 30 meters, then a natural covered approach behind a rock spine that would take someone to within 20 meters of the elevated position. The Barrett support vehicle, a secondary transport, was staged at the base of the ridge per standard protocol. She did the calculation. Wind from the northwest, maybe 10 miles an hour, consistent. Elevation differential approximately 40 meters. Distance to the primary shooter position she'd identified from the shot pattern, roughly 800 meters. Secondary position at approximately 650. Her father's voice arrived without invitation. The rifle doesn't care who you are. It only cares what you ask of it. I need your radio, she told Alvarez. What are you? Your radio? Now. He unclipped it and handed it to her. She keyed it to Shepard's frequency. Commander Shepard, this is Garrett. Vehicle 1 has 2 stabilized casualties, 1 critical immobilized. Vehicle 3 sniper is down left hip, non-mobile. I have a covered approach to the North Ridge and a line of sight to the Barrett on the support vehicle. Request authorization. Static. Firing. Someone shouting in the background. Then Shepard's voice, Garrett, say again your last. I can reach the Barrett, she said. I have a covered approach. I need your authorization. A pause that lasted approximately 3 seconds and felt like considerably longer. Reeves came on the frequency before Shepard could answer. Negative, negative, Garrett. You are a medic. You do not touch that weapon. You stay with your casualties, and you. Lieutenant Commander Sloan said, still in the same measured voice. I have 17 personnel in a designed kill box with no sniper support and 2 elevated shooter positions covering every exit route. In approximately 4 minutes, they are going to begin moving down from those ridges because they will know we can't respond at range. At that point, this stops being a firefight and becomes a massacre. I need authorization, sir. Right now. Silence. Timestamp 33 minutes, twist 2, the decision. Shepard's voice came back, and it was not the voice of a man who was uncertain. Garrett, what's your wind return? She blinked, not because she didn't have an answer, because she hadn't expected him to ask that question. That was not the question of a man deciding whether to authorize her. That was the question of a man who had already authorized her and was checking her preparation. Northwest 10 to 12 miles per hour consistent, she said. No significant gusting from my current position. Distance to primary target. 800 meters approximately. I'll confirm on glass. Secondary. 650, southeast of primary, offset about 30 meters in elevation. Another pause. Garrett, Shepard said, my father used to say there are two kinds of people in a crisis. People who tell you what they can't do, and people who tell you what they're going to do. A beat. Go get that rifle. Reeves exploded onto the frequency. Commander, I am the operational. You're in a ditch behind a burning vehicle, Lieutenant Commander, Shepard said. I'm the senior officer on this convoy, and I am making a field decision. Garrett, go, now. She was already moving. Mini climax 36 minutes. The first 30 meters were the worst 30 meters of her life. Open ground. No cover fire from the ridge tracking across the convoy floor. She moved in the way her father had taught her to move, through hostile terrain. Low, fast, irregular pattern. Never the path that looked like the path, always. The path that looked like no one would be stupid enough to take it. Something hit the dirt 2 feet to her right, then 1 foot to her left. They'd seen her. She did not stop. Stopping was the only thing that guaranteed she died. Moving was the only thing that gave her a chance. She reached the rock spine. She pressed herself against it and pulled in a breath and felt the specific burning sensation across her left shoulder that told her something had grazed her without her permission. She reached back and touched it. Her hand came away with blood. Shallow, manageable. She filed it and kept moving. The support vehicle was at the base of the ridge driver's side door, open engine still running. She reached it in 11 seconds. The Barrett was in its encase in the rear. She opened it the way you open something you've been waiting to open for a long time, with complete focus and without ceremony. It was heavier than she remembered. It had been years. She'd fired the class twice, both times at ranges with her father, both times with the specific gravity of a lesson rather than a test. This was a test. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She checked the optic, a night force scope already dialed for standard elevation she'd need to adjust. She found the bipod extended. It moved to the rear hatch of the vehicle and set up in the prone position with the barrel just clearing the hatch frame. She put her eye to the scope, and she found them. Primary position, 2 shooters, rocky outcropping at 820 meters, slightly more than her estimate. She adjusted. One was active on the rifle. The other was talking into a radio, coordinating. If she took the active shooter first, she bought time. If she took the radio operator first, she disrupted the coordination and potentially neutralized the secondary position before it could adjust. Her father, the hardest shot isn't the one in front of you. It's the one that matters most. Find it, then find your stillness. She slowed her breathing. Wind 10 miles an hour northwest. Adjust left. Elevation 40 meters above. Bullet drop at 820. She ran the number without a calculator, the way she'd been doing it since she was 11 years old. Adjust down 4.5 inches. She found her stillness. The shot broke. Mini climax 41 minutes. The radio operator on the primary position went still. The active shooter spun, looking for the source, looking in the wrong direction. They hadn't expected fire from below and to the east. They'd expected it from the convoy floor, and the fraction of a second it took him to reorient was the fraction of a second she needed. Second shot. Primary position, silent. She was already moving the scope to the secondary position at 650. The shooter there had heard the shots and was moving, experienced, disciplined. Not panicking, just repositioning. She tracked him, waited. He was moving left to right behind a rock face. She'd have 1 moment of exposure in a gap between 2 boulders, approximately 2 seconds of visibility. She waited for the gap. Breathe, find the stillness. Let the moment find you. He crossed the gap. Third shot. And then it was quiet. Not fully quiet. There were still secondary shooters on the south ridge. Still fire on the convoy floor. Still everything but the coordinated elevated fire from the north ridge that had been the spine of the ambush was gone. And without it, the geometry of the kill box collapsed. Shepard's voice on the radio, North Ridge is down. All units suppress South Ridge and move to the eastern egress. Move now. She lay there for exactly 2 seconds, her cheek against the stock, her breath evening out. Then she got up, secured the weapon, and went back to her casualties. Timestamp 47 minutes. Alvarez was exactly where she'd left him. He looked up when she came around the boulder, and something passed across his face, relief and shock, and something more complicated than either. You actually, he started. 3 down from the north ridge, she said. South position is being suppressed. We need to move. She got her shoulder under his arm. Can you stand? If you help me, then stand. He stood. They moved. Behind them, the south ridge went quiet as the remaining security element pushed through the eastern egress route and collapsed the secondary position from the flank. In Vehicle 1, the driver with the broken arm had somehow gotten his radio working with his right hand and had been relaying position data to Shepard for the last 6 minutes. Torres on comms in Vehicle 2 had re-established the primary frequency and was coordinating the egress with the kind of focused competence that made Sloan think he'd packed that extra magazine after all. It took them 19 minutes to get every vehicle and every person through the egress and onto the open ground beyond the ridge system. When they stopped, when the shooting was fully over and the dust was beginning to settle and the sound of the desert reasserted itself in the specific way it always did, after violence filling the space vacated by noise, with its own older, deeper silence, Sloan sat down on the ground next to Vehicle 2 with her kit open and began the systematic triage of 17 human beings. She had a graze wound on her left shoulder that she bandaged herself last after everyone else was done because that was the order in which it needed to happen. She was on her 12th patient when the shadow fell across her. She looked up. Shepard stood there. His uniform had dust on it. There was a cut on his chin that he hadn't addressed. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, not the calculation of the armory, not the assessment of the briefing room. Something that didn't have a tactical name. He didn't say anything for a moment. She went back to her patient, checked the pressure bandage on the operator's thigh, adjusted the angle, checked color and pulse. Wind reading was right, Shepard said. She didn't look up. 10 to 12. I said consistent. It was consistent. No drift. Distance estimate on primary was off by 20 meters. 20 meters at 800 is within my margin, she said. I adjusted on glass. I know, he said. I saw the results. He paused. Your shoulder. It's a graze. I'll address it when I'm done. You're done with him, Shepard said. Address it. She looked at her patient. He was stable. She looked at the next one, stable also. She looked at her shoulder, reached into the kit, pulled out what she needed, and did the dressing in 45 seconds without stopping the conversation. Reeves is going to file a report, she said. Reeves is going to file a report, Shepard agreed. He's going to say I violated operational protocol. He's going to say you violated operational protocol, Shepard said. Did I? She said. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was asking a real question the way she asked all real questions directly without softening it. Shepard looked at the 17 people around them. All alive, all breathing. The convoy damaged but intact. The mission, by any honest accounting, not lost. You violated the rules as written, he said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You did something you were not authorized to do. He paused. And 17 people are alive because you did it. She secured the dressing on her shoulder. My father used to say, she said quietly, that there's always a rule and there's always what the rule is trying to protect. And that the ones who understand the difference between those two things are the ones who make it home. Shepard was quiet for a long moment. Cole Garrett said that, he said, not a question. He said a lot of things, she said. I kept the ones that mattered. Somewhere behind them, Torres was reestablishing comms with the forward staging area. Weston was assessing Vehicle 2 for drive capability. Alvarez was sitting against a tire with his leg extended in pain, but present watching Sloan with an expression he wasn't bothering to hide anymore. The desert was quiet again. Not the quiet of before, not the listening quiet, the anticipating quiet. The quiet of after. Sloan Garrett pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, looked at her triage list, and went to her next patient. Because there was always a next patient. That was the job. And she had never, not once in 9 years, failed to do the job. The drive back to Yuma took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Sloan spent all of it in the back of Vehicle 2 with her hand on the crew chief's pulse and her eyes on the road ahead, and her mind doing what her mind always did in the aftermath of something large, not processing it, not yet just holding it at a careful distance. The way you hold a piece of metal, you know, is still hot, waiting for it to cool enough to touch. Torres drove. He didn't talk. He understood the way the good ones always understood that silence after a firefight was not emptiness. It was work. It was the specific labor of 17 people separately and quietly reassembling themselves into something that could walk back through a gate and report for duty and pretend that what had just happened was a thing that could be filed and closed. Weston sat in the passenger seat and stared at the road with both hands on his knees, and Sloane could see the set of his jaw from behind, and she knew that particular jaw. She'd seen it on 100 men and 100 vehicles coming back from 100 things that didn't have clean names. He was holding himself together with the particular rigid discipline of someone who knows. The moment he relaxes, something is going to come apart. She let him hold it. That was his right. Her job in that vehicle for those 2 hours and 14 minutes was the pulse under her fingers, and she did her job. Alvarez rode in Vehicle 3 with his leg immobilized and his eyes open and his mouth closed. She checked on him once at the staging point before they rolled, and he'd looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, stripped of the stubbornness, stripped of the pride. Just a man looking at another person and not knowing what category to put them in because they didn't fit any of the ones he had. "You're going to need imaging on that hip," she'd told him. "I know," he'd said, "and you're going to tell medical exactly how long you've been managing it." A pause. "Garrett, Alvarez." She'd looked at him steadily. "You did your job today. The part of your job you could do, you did it. Don't add a lie to it at the end." He'd looked away, then back. "Yeah," he'd said. "Okay." That was the last thing they'd said to each other before the convoy rolled. Now 90 minutes into the drive with the Yuma facility still 40 minutes out, Sloane allowed herself one thing. She looked out the narrow armored window at the desert moving past, and she let herself feel for exactly 60 seconds the full weight of what had happened on that ridge. 3 shots. 3 people who were no longer alive because of decisions she had made in approximately 4 seconds of total clarity. She was not going to pretend that didn't mean something. Her father hadn't pretended that either. He told her once, sitting on the porch of their house outside Flagstaff, on an evening when he'd come back from somewhere he couldn't name, that the day you stop feeling the weight of it is the day you've become something you don't want to be. "The weight isn't guilt," he'd said. "Guilt is self-indulgent. The weight is respect for the gravity of the decision, for the fact that you were the one who made it." He'd been quiet for a moment. "You carry it. You don't put it down, but you don't let it carry you either." She counted 60 seconds. Then she went back to the pulse under her fingers. Timestamp 8 minutes. They rolled through the gate at 13:47. Commander Shepard was out of Vehicle 1 before it fully stopped. He moved with the particular purposeful speed of a man who has a conversation he needs to have before someone else has it first. And the someone else he was thinking about was visible through the windshield of the trailing command vehicle, already on a radio, already with the specific expression of a man composing a report in real time. Reeves. Shepard got to the medical bay ahead of everyone. He stood in the doorway and waited for Sloane, who came through the gate. Last she'd stayed at Vehicle 3 until she was certain Alvarez was transferred to the base medical team without anyone jostling his left side. She came through the door and stopped when she saw Shepard. "Sir," she said. "Sit down," he said. "I have post-mission assessments too." "Your team is handling post-mission assessments," he said. "Sit down, Garrett." She sat, not because she was obedient, she wasn't particularly, but because she recognized the tone. It wasn't a command. It was the voice of someone who needed her to stop moving for a minute so they could look at her. He looked at her left shoulder. The dressing she'd applied to herself was clean, no bleed-through properly secured. He looked at her hands. Steady. He looked at her face. Whatever he was checking for, he seemed to find it or not find it in the way he needed. "Reeves is writing a report," he said. "I know. He's framing it as unauthorized weapons use, violation of operational protocol, and potential reckless endangerment of mission integrity." "Is that what it was?" she said. Same direct tone she'd used in the desert. Not defiant. Honest. "I told you what it was," Shepard said. "You violated the written rules. The question that report is going to raise is whether that violation warrants disciplinary action." Sloane looked at her hands for a moment, then at him. "What's your answer?" He pulled a chair out and sat across from her. Shepard sitting down was unusual enough that it changed the register of the room. "My answer," he said, "is that the rules exist to prevent a medic who has no firearms training from picking up a weapon and making a bad situation worse. That's what the rule is protecting against." He paused. "The rule did not account for a medic who can put 3 rounds on target at variable distances in under 90 seconds under fire." "No," she said, "it didn't." "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" It wasn't a question. He already knew. He'd read her file, made his calls, she'd understood that much from the armory encounter. But he was asking her to say it out loud, and she understood why. Because the thing said out loud is different from the thing in a file. The thing in a file is information. The thing said out loud is a person. My father started teaching me when I was 7, she said, formally with real weapons from age 11. He trained me the same way Delta trained him: wine reading, distance calculation, breathing, control position mechanics. Every deployment, leave every time he came home. For 8 years. She paused. When he died, I stopped. I made a decision. I was going to be a medic. I was going to save lives, not take them. But you kept training, Shepard said. A beat. I kept the skills maintained, she said carefully. Alone, private ranges, nothing official. Why talk by him? The question landed in a specific place, and she felt it land. Why? Not why did you train? That was obvious. That was muscle memory and discipline and the inability to let go of something your father gave you. Why was the harder question? Why did you hide it? Why did you enlist as a medic and spend 9 years being exactly what everyone expected while carrying something nobody knew about? Because I didn't trust myself with it, she said. The skill without the judgment is just a weapon. My father understood the judgment. He spent 30 years learning when. I was 22 years old when he died, and I knew how, but I didn't know when, and I was afraid of what I'd do with it if I put myself in a position where someone told me I could. Shepard was quiet for a moment. And today, he said, today I knew when, she said. Mini climax 14 minutes. The door opened. Reeves walked in without knocking, which was his way of communicating that he didn't consider whatever was happening in this room to be a conversation he needed to respect. He looked at Sloan, then at Shepard. His expression settled into something between controlled anger and the particular righteousness of a man who believes he has the documentation to win an argument. Commander, he said, I need Petty Officer Garrett for a formal debrief. She's with me, Shepard said. With respect, sir, what happened on Sultan Ridge is an operational matter, and I am the Petty Mason. You are the officer who ordered his designated marksman onto a mission with a documented injury, Shepard said in a tone so even it was almost conversational. That's what you are right now, Marcus. Sit down or leave, but don't tell me who you need. Reeves went very still. In 9 years of watching men in authority encounter other men in authority, Sloan had learned to read the specific moment when someone decided whether to fight or to recalculate. She watched Reeves make that calculation. He stayed standing, but he didn't say anything else. Petty Officer Garrett, Shepard said without taking his eyes off Reeves, is there anything in your medical assessment of Petty Officer Alvarez's injury that suggests it was a condition that should have been cleared for deployment? Yes, sir, she said. I flagged it in the pre-mission briefing. The record will show that. And the response from command was, Lieutenant Commander Reeves indicated that Alvarez's self-assessment of fitness for duty was sufficient. Reeves took a step forward. That is exactly what happened, Sloan said. Not loudly, not aggressively, just factually in the tone of someone reporting a blood pressure reading. I raised the concern. You overruled it. Those are the facts. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're a medic. You don't make operational calls. No, she said. I make medical calls. You make operational calls. The medical call was that Alvarez had a stress injury with meaningful probability of failure under field conditions. You made the operational call to deploy him anyway. She paused. His hip locked 40 minutes into the mission. That's what happened. I'm not assigning blame. I'm reporting what happened. The room was very quiet. Reeves looked at Shepard. This is insubordination. This is a debrief, Shepard said, and it's going exactly the way it should. Timestamp 20 minutes. Twist 1. What happened next was something Sloan had not anticipated. Shepard stood up and he put a folder on the table between them. Not Reeves' report, not the operational file. Something else. She could see her name on the tab. I made some calls before Sultan Ridge, Shepard said. After the armory. After I watched you look at that Barrett. He opened the folder. One of those calls was to a retired Delta Sergeant Major named Hendricks. Thomas Hendricks. He served with your father for 11 years. The name landed on her like something physical. Thomas Hendricks. She hadn't heard that name since she was 17 years old, sitting at a kitchen table in Flagstaff, while a man with tired eyes told her that her father wasn't coming home. She kept her face still. It cost her something, but she kept it still. He told me about you, Shepard said. Not a little, a lot. He looked at the folder. He said Cole Garrett talked about you on every deployment. Said he was training you. Said you had his exact words were the rarest combination of natural precision and tactical instinct he had ever seen in 30 years of working with shooters. Shepard looked up. He said Cole believed you could have been one of the best long-range operators in the military. If you'd been given the path. Reeves made a sound that was almost a laugh. She's a medic. Nobody looked at him. Sloane's throat was doing something she didn't give it permission to do. She controlled it. My father wanted me to be a medic, she said. After he died, he left a letter. He said he'd spent his life being the person who ended things, and he wanted me to be the person who kept things alive. She stopped. I honored that. You did, Shepard said. And today you also honored everything else he gave you. She looked at the folder. What is that? Shepard closed it, put his hand on top of it. It's the beginning of a conversation I want to have with you, he said. Not today, not while you're post-mission and running off 4 hours of sleep and a graze wound on your shoulder. He picked it up. Go to medical. Get cleared. Sleep. He looked at her steadily. We'll talk tomorrow. She nodded, started to stand. The report, Reeves said. His voice had a different quality now, still hard, but something underneath it had shifted, and she could hear it even if she couldn't name it yet. My report still stands. Your report will be reviewed, Shepard said, along with a complete record of today's events, including the medical flag on Alvarez and the operational decision that overruled it. A pause. I'd think carefully, Marcus, about what story you want to tell. Reeves left. The door closed and the room held the specific silence of a confrontation that wasn't over. Just paused. Mini-climax 26 minutes. Medical cleared her at 16:19. The graze on her shoulder was exactly what she'd assessed it as superficial clean, requiring nothing more than proper dressing and a tetanus update she was already current on. The corpsman who treated her was 23 years old and kept looking at her with an expression she recognized as the beginning of a story he was going to tell people later. Does it hurt? He asked, which was a strange question, given that she'd already dressed it herself in the field, but she understood he needed something to say. A little, she said, which was true. She went to the barracks, sat on her bunk, looked at the wall for approximately 4 minutes. Then she took out the photograph. Her father at 34 in the Arizona desert with the Remington in his hands and the long afternoon shadows behind him. She had looked at this photograph before every deployment for 9 years. She had never looked at it after a deployment. She had a superstition about that photographs after were for people who needed to check whether something had changed. She had always been afraid of what she might see. She looked at it now. He looked the same. Of course he looked the same. He'd looked the same for 17 years, but she sat with it differently than she had before, and after a few minutes she understood why. She had always looked at this photograph as his daughter, as the person he had trained and loved and left behind when a mountain in Kannar province decided that was the day. Tonight, for the first time, she looked at it as something else. She wasn't sure yet what the something else was, but it was there. She could feel it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not the thing itself yet, but the announcement of it. She put the photograph away, lay down, was asleep in 6 minutes. Timestamp 32 minutes, audience retention hook. She dreamed about the ridge. Not the shooting, not the actual sequence of it, not the scope and the wind and the 3 shots. She dreamed about the climb, the 30 meters of open ground with rounds cutting past her, the specific burning sensation of making a decision with your whole body that your brain hasn't fully signed off on yet moving forward because stopping is the only thing that guarantees you die, and you do not intend to die today. Not on this ridge, not in this desert. Not before you've done what needs doing. In the dream, she was 11 years old, and her father was at the top of the ridge, not with a rifle, but just standing there watching her climb with the particular expression he'd had when she'd made the 3.5-inch correction at 300 yards, deciding whether to be proud or to push for more. In the dream, when she reached him, he said, "You rushed it." And she said, "I know." And he said, "But you didn't stop." She woke up at 3:47, lay in the dark for a moment, then got up and went to the medical bay to check on her patients because that was what she did, and she was not going to stop doing it because of a dream. The crew chief was sleeping. His head laceration was healing cleanly. The driver with the compound fracture had been transferred to the base hospital for surgical repair. She'd checked on him before she'd gone to sleep, and he'd been out of surgery and asking for a cheeseburger, which she considered a positive prognostic indicator. The operator with the perforated eardrum was awake and annoyed, which was also a good sign. She was checking his chart when someone appeared in the doorway. Alvarez, he was on crutches. Someone in base medical had clearly made him use them, which meant he'd been seen by someone who didn't accept his self-assessment, which made her feel a sharp and genuine satisfaction. "Should you be up?" she said. "Probably not," he said. "MRI says partial labral tear, aggravated stress fracture of the acetabular rim, and something else with a Latin name that means I'm looking at 6 weeks minimum." "8," she said. "Minimum. The labral tear alone is..." "8," he said. "Fine, 8. He came in carefully maneuvered to the chair by the window sat, looked at her. "I wanted to say something." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "Garrett, you told me the truth when nobody else was going to, about the hip, before the mission." He stopped. "And then you went up that ridge." He was quiet for a second in the way that men are quiet when they're working up to something. "I've been in this unit for 4 years. I've been in firefights. I know what it costs to do what you did, not the shooting, the climbing. The decision to go, with rounds in the air and no cover and..." He stopped again. "I just wanted to say that I know what that was, and I'm not going to pretend I don't." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "How's the pain?" He almost laughed. "Almost." 6, he said. "I'll get you something." "Garrett," he stopped her. "What happens now?" "With Reeves' report..." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Shepard will back you." "Shepard backed me in the field," she said. "A formal review board is different. There are regulations. She paused. "I picked up a weapon I wasn't authorized to touch. I changed the rules of engagement without clearance. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I'd do it again. But it was the right thing to do has never been sufficient defense in front of a review board." Alvarez was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him in any of their prior interactions. Something that was past respect, more serious than gratitude. 17 people came home today, he said. "I know," she said. "I was there." Mini climax 40 minutes. The review board convened at 0900 the following morning. Sloan had slept 4 more hours after her 0347 round showered, put on her dress uniform, and sat at a table in the JAG conference room at 0850 with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and her face in the careful, neutral expression she'd been cultivating since she was 11 years old, and had learned that showing people exactly what you were thinking was a luxury you couldn't always afford. The board was 3 officers. Captain Eleanor Voss from JAG, who had the particular precise manner of someone who had been reading violations and regulations for so long that human behavior had become for her primarily a matter of documentation. Commander Hayes from Operations, whom Sloan had never met, but who had the look of a man who had been briefed on this case and had already formed a preliminary opinion and was here to see if anything changed it. And Rear Admiral Patricia Odom, who was the highest-ranking officer Sloan had ever been in the same room with, and who said nothing during the preliminary statements and simply watched everything with the steady attention of someone who had been watching things for a very long time. Reeves presented his report. To his credit, it was accurate. He didn't embellish. He stated the facts as he understood them. Petty Officer Garrett had left her designated position, taken an unauthorized weapon, engaged hostile targets without clearance, and in doing so had violated multiple operational protocols. He stated it all in the flat professional tone of a man who understood that the strongest argument was the one that let the facts speak for themselves. When he finished, Captain Voss looked at Sloan. "Petty Officer Garrett," she said, "do you dispute any element of Lieutenant Commander Reeves' account?" "No, ma'am," Sloan said. "You acknowledge the violations as stated." "I acknowledge the actions as stated," Sloan said. "Whether they constitute violations under the circumstances is the question I understand this board to be here to answer." Voss made a note. Commander Hayes leaned forward. "Walk me through your decision, from the moment you assess the situation to the moment you reach the weapon." She walked him through it. Not defensively, not apologetically, the way she'd have described a medical procedure, sequentially, factually, with the specific observations and calculations that had led to each decision. Wind reading, position assessment, trajectory of the ambush, timeline to escalation, the specific gap between available options and what those options would cost in human lives. Hayes listened, made his own notes. His expression didn't change, which told her nothing about what he was thinking. Then Admiral Odom spoke for the first time. "Petty Officer Garrett," she said. Her voice was unhurried, the voice of someone who had never needed volume to fill a room. "How long had you been capable of making those shots?" The question landed differently than Hayes' questions had. Not procedural, personal, aimed at something deeper than the events of the previous day. Sloan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Since I was 15, ma'am, approximately." "Your father trained you?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you enlisted as a medic?" "Yes, ma'am." Whitesbow, the same question Shepard had asked her, but from Admiral Odom, it had a different weight, not a superior trying to understand a subordinate, but something closer to one person asking another person the question you ask when you want to know what they're made of. "Because saving lives felt more important than taking them," Sloan said. "And because my father asked me to. Not in words. He never told me what to do. He just, the last time I saw him before that final deployment, he said that the world had enough people who could end things. What it needed was people who could hold things together under pressure." She paused. "I decided to be one of those people." Odom nodded slowly. "And yesterday?" "Yesterday I was both," Sloan said. "Oh, my man. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. But when the moment came, I had the skill, and I had the judgment, and I made the call." She held Odom's gaze. "I would make it again." The room was very quiet. Timestamp 48 minutes, twist 2. Shepard was called in at 10:41. He sat across from the board in the chair Reeves had vacated and answered every question with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. He confirmed the sequence of events. He confirmed his authorization of Sloan's action in the field. He confirmed that in his professional assessment, the authorization had been the correct call, given the operational circumstances. Then Admiral Odom asked him something nobody in the room had anticipated. "Commander Shepard," she said, "prior to Sultan Ridge, what was your assessment of Petty Officer Garrett's capabilities?" A pause. "I suspected she was significantly more capable than her role indicated," he said. "Why, Mosinang?" "The way she looked at a Barrett MN8 2A1 in my armory 3 days before the mission," he said. "Like she knew it, not like a layperson who has seen a powerful weapon and is impressed by it, like someone who has handled one and understands what it's for." "And your response to that assessment?" "I had her file pulled. I made inquiries. I confirmed my suspicion." He paused. "And then I put her on the Sultan Ridge convoy as the primary medic." "Knowing what she was capable of," Odom said. Shepard looked at the Admiral steadily. "Knowing what she was capable of," he said. The implication sat in the room like a third party. Sloan, from her seat against the wall where review board witnesses waited, felt the shape of it. Shepard had known. Not completely, not specifically, he couldn't have predicted the ambush, couldn't have planned for the sniper going down. But he had put a person on that convoy who was carrying more than a medical kit, and he had understood that, and he had not reported it upward. He had made a calculation, and the calculation was, if something goes wrong out there, I want her present. She looked at the back of his head. She didn't know if she was angry. She turned the question over in her mind the way you turn a stone looking for what's underneath it. He had known and said nothing. He had put her in a position where her hidden capability might be needed. Was that manipulation? Was it trust? Was it the particular cold-blooded pragmatism of a commander who had been sending people into dangerous places for 30 years and had learned to prepare for the ways things go wrong? Maybe all three. Maybe all three at once. Captain Voss asked a clarifying question and Shepard answered it, and Sloan sat with what she just understood and felt it settle into her the way large things settle, not resolved, not finished, but placed. Something to return to later. The board broke for deliberation at 11:18. Mini-climax 54 minutes. Sloan sat in the hallway outside the conference room with her hands in her lap and waited. Torres walked past at one point and saw her and did a small double take and then walked back and sat next to her. "How's it going in there?" he said. "Board's deliberating," she said. He nodded. Was quiet for a moment. "I packed the extra magazine," he said. "Like you said." "I know, I saw." Did the..." He stopped. Tried again. When you were up on that ridge, were you scared? She thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which was something she didn't always do. When people asked her questions, she could answer with something easier than the truth. No, she said. Not during. During there wasn't room for it. It was just calculations, wind and distance and timing. She paused. After. After I was scared. After I sat against a tire and checked your pulse and my hands were completely steady and everything else in me was not steady. She paused again. That's the lag. The fear comes, it just comes after. It waits until you don't need it to wait anymore. Torres absorbed this. That's kind of terrifying, he said. Little bit, she agreed. He looked at the conference room door. You know what Weston said about you in the vehicle driving back? What? He said. Torres paused like he was deciding whether to repeat it. He said that in 20 years of service, he'd never seen anybody do what you did, and that Cole Garrett must have been one hell of a man. She looked straight ahead. He was, she said. Timestamp 58 minutes. The door opened at 12:04. Admiral Odom came out first, which was unusual. Board decisions were typically delivered inside the conference room, not in a hallway. But Odom walked out and looked at Sloan, and there was something in her expression that Sloan couldn't categorize with the tools she usually used for reading people. Walk with me, Odom said. They walked. Down the hall, out a side door into the flat Yuma sunlight. Odom didn't speak for a moment. She had her hands behind her back and her face angled slightly upward, and she looked like a woman who was choosing her next words with the same care she brought to everything else. I've been in this Navy for 31 years, she said. I've read a lot of files. I've sat on a lot of review boards. She paused. I've never sat in a room where a petty officer voluntarily climbed an exposed ridgeline under active fire, picked up a weapon they weren't authorized to touch, and put 3 rounds on target at variable range in under 2 minutes. She glanced at Sloan, while already wounded. Sloan said nothing. The board has completed its deliberation, Odom said. The finding is that the actions on Sultan Ridge constituted a violation of written operational protocol. She paused and Sloan's chest did something controlled and inevitable, the way a person breathes before receiving a blow. The board further finds that those actions were the direct cause of preventing what intelligence reconstruction now estimates would have been a total loss of the convoy, all vehicles, all personnel. Sloan kept her eyes forward. Lieutenant Commander Reeves has been directed to undergo a formal performance review related to his handling of the medical flag on Petty Officer Alvarez and his operational decisions during the ambush. Odom continued, that review is separate from this proceeding and its outcome will be determined independently. And my proceeding, Sloan said, steady. She kept her voice completely steady. Odom stopped walking, turned to look at her directly. No disciplinary action will be taken, she said. The violation is noted in the record and closed. Commander Shepard's field authorization has been upheld. She paused. What happens next, Petty Officer Garrett, depends on a conversation that Commander Shepard has requested authorization to have with you. I have granted that authorization. Another pause. I will tell you this much. What I saw in that conference room today was not a medic who got lucky with a rifle. What I saw was a person who has been carrying an extraordinary capability inside a deliberately chosen limitation because she understood the difference between what she could do and what she had decided to be. Odom's voice was even, but something underneath it was not quite even. That is not a small thing. That is one of the rarest things there is. Sloane's throat was doing the thing again. She controlled it. My father taught me that, she said. I know, Odom said. I looked up his record after the session. She held Sloane's gaze. He would not be surprised by a single thing you did yesterday. She walked back toward the building. Sloane stood in the Yuma sunlight for a moment. The desert was flat around her, and the air was dry and hot and completely indifferent to anything that had happened in the last 24 hours the way the desert always was. It had been there before any of this. It would be there after. She thought about her father standing in a desert exactly like this one with a rifle in his hands, and the afternoon shadows behind him, and a daughter who was paying attention to everything. She thought about what he'd told her the last time she'd seen him 2 weeks before the mountain in Kunar province. She hadn't understood it then. She'd been 22, and she'd thought she understood things the way you did at 22. And then something large enough happens, and you understand that you didn't understand them at all. You just had the beginning of them. What he'd said was, the skill isn't yours until you've chosen when to use it. Until then, you're just carrying something that belongs to someone else. She breathed in the desert air. Then she turned and walked back inside. She had a conversation with Commander Shepard to get to, and for the first time in 9 years, she wasn't afraid of what it might change. Shepard's office was the kind of space that told you exactly who occupied it without telling you anything personal. No photographs, no awards on the wall, a desk that was clear except for whatever was currently being worked on, and right now what was currently being worked on was the folder with her name on the tab, open with 3 pages visible, and a 4th turned face down in a way that suggested it had been read recently and set aside for a reason. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. "Close it behind you," he said. She did. Sat in the chair across from his desk without being asked because she understood that this was not the kind of conversation where you waited to be invited to sit. This was the kind of conversation where you came in ready, and sitting was part of being ready. He looked at her for a moment. Not the assessment look, not the calculation look. Something else. Something she hadn't seen from him before, which was notable, because she had been reading Shepard's face carefully since the first day she'd arrived at this unit, and she thought she'd cataloged most of his registers. "How are you?" he said. "Fine," she said. Then because he'd earned more than that, processing, but functional. He nodded, accepted that, looked at the folder. "I owe you something," he said. She waited. "I knew what you were capable of before Salton Ridge," he said. "Not specifically. I didn't know you could make those shots. But I knew you were carrying something that wasn't in your file, and I put you on that convoy without telling you what I suspected and without giving you any indication that I would back you if something happened that required you to use it." She held his gaze. "You authorized me in the field. After the fact," he said, "after you'd already made the decision to go. I didn't give you the authorization before you needed it. I gave it to you after you had already climbed 30 meters of open ground under fire." He paused. "That's not the same thing, and you should know that I understand the difference." She was quiet for a moment. The things she'd felt in the hallway during his board testimony, the question of whether what he'd done was manipulation or trust or cold-blooded pragmatism sat between them, and she had a feeling he knew it was there. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Because I wasn't certain," he said. "I had a strong read. I had Hendrick's assessment. But reads and assessments are not certainty. And if I told you before the mission that I knew what you were and that I expected you might need to use it, I would have changed the mission for you in a way that wasn't fair." He looked at her directly. "You needed to make that decision yourself, without me having preloaded it." She absorbed this. "And if I hadn't made it," she said, "if I'd stayed with my casualties and done exactly what I was ordered to do, then 17 people would probably be dead," he said, "and I would have been wrong about you." He paused. "But I wasn't wrong about you." The room held that for a moment. "No," she said, "you weren't." Timestamp 8 minutes. He turned the folder around and slid it across the desk to her. She looked at it. The page that had been face down was face up now. It was a single sheet with a header she recognized: Naval Special Warfare Command, administrative designation, and a block of text that was formal and precise in the way of official documents, and as she read it, the specific meaning of it arrived slowly, the way large things arrive, giving you time to prepare for their full weight before they land completely. The document proposed a new operational designation. Petty Officer First Class Sloan Garrett. Primary role Combat Medic, Naval Special Warfare. Secondary role Designated Marksman. Dual classification, first of its kind in Naval Special Warfare history. She read it twice. Then she put it face down on the desk exactly the way he'd had it and looked at him. "This isn't a standard designation," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't. There's no precedent for a dual medical marksman role in this command." "There wasn't," he said. "As of 0900 this morning, there's a framework. Admiral Odom authorized the framework development after the board session." He watched her face. "The framework exists. Whether it gets built into something operational depends on whether the person it was designed around wants to build it." She looked at the folder. 9 years. 9 years of a specific decision made at 22 over a letter from a man who'd been killed in a mountain province to be the person who held things together instead of the person who ended them. 9 years of maintaining a skill in secret in private ranges alone, not because she intended to use it, but because she couldn't bring herself to let it go completely. Because letting it go completely would have been like letting go of the last thing her father had given her. And now someone was telling her she didn't have to choose. "Talk me through what this looks like operationally," she said. He did. 14 minutes, no notes, the specific detailed fluency of a man who had been thinking about this for several days. The dual role would require additional formal qualifications. She'd need to go through official sniper certification, not because her capability was in question, but because the documentation had to exist. She'd carry a modified kit in the field, lighter than a standard sniper load, heavier than a pure medical kit, optimized for the dual function. She'd operate with a two-person support element that understood both roles and could adapt to whichever the situation demanded. She'd be the prototype, the test case. If it worked, if the model proved viable in the field, it became a template for a new kind of operator. If it didn't work, the program closed, and she went back to being a medic with an unusual notation in her file. "What are the odds it works?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "I've been doing this for 30 years, he said. "I've seen a lot of things tried. Most of them fail because the person at the center of them is good at one thing and adequate at the other. The thing that makes this viable, the only thing that makes it viable, is that you are genuinely exceptional at both." He paused. "The odds depend entirely on you." "That's not an answer," she said. "No," he said. "It's the truth. Which is better?" My climax, 16 minutes. She picked up the document and read it a third time. Something moved in her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. Not excitement. It was quieter than excitement and deeper. Not fear. She'd been afraid before she knew what that felt like, and this wasn't it. It was closer to the feeling she'd had on the ridge, looking through the scope, finding the stillness before the shot. The feeling of being exactly in the place where your preparation and the present moment meet. She put the document down. "I have a condition," she said. Shepard raised an eyebrow, not offended, interested. "The training doctrine," she said. "If this program moves forward, if it becomes a template, I want to be part of building the training doctrine. Not advising on it, building it. The curriculum for how you teach this dual role, how you identify candidates, how you train operators to make the judgment calls that come with carrying both functions." She paused. "That's the part that matters most. The skill is the easy part. The judgment is what has to be taught. And I know how to teach it because my father taught me." The room was quiet. Shepard looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face did a thing she'd never seen it do before. Not quite a smile, not Shepard's style, too much of a tell, but something adjacent to it. Something that lived in the same territory. "That's not a condition," he said. "Bo-oh," she said. "That's a proposal," he said, "and it's a better one than mine." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about bringing in an outside consultant for the doctrine development," he said. "Someone from the training command. Someone with curriculum design experience." He paused. "I was wrong about that. It should be you. It was always you." She held his gaze. "Then yes," she said. "I'm in." Timestamp 24 minutes, twist 1. What happened next she had not anticipated, and she had anticipated most things. Shepard reached into his desk drawer and put something on the table between them. Not a document, not a file. A photograph 4x6, slightly worn at the corners. She recognized it before her brain had fully processed what it was showing. The desert, the afternoon shadows, a man with a rifle. But it wasn't her photograph. The man in this photograph was older than her father in her photograph. 40, maybe 41. He was standing at a range position. She recognized the Flagstaff training range where her father had taken her on weekends, and he had his arm around the shoulder of a younger man who was holding a rifle in the way of someone who has just been shown something for the first time and is still learning the weight of it. The older man was her father. The younger man was Marcus Shepard. She looked up from the photograph. Shepard was watching her with the expression of a man who has been waiting to say something for several days and has been choosing the right moment and has determined that this is it. "I didn't tell you the whole truth," he said. "When you asked if I knew him, I said I knew of him." He paused. "I knew him personally. We did 2 joint operations together in 2003 and 2004. He was the best long-range operator I ever worked alongside." Another pause. "And he talked about you, not constantly, but when the subject came up, He said he had a daughter who could outshoot half his unit and didn't know it yet. The thing in her throat was back. She controlled it, but only barely. You knew who I was, she said, before I came to this unit. I knew who you might be, he said. I didn't know who you'd become. There's a difference. He picked up the photograph and looked at it. When your file crossed my desk 8 months ago when you were assigned here, I recognized your name immediately. And I thought, he stopped, chose the next words carefully. I thought that either this was going to be something remarkable or I was going to be very disappointed. And I didn't want to be disappointed. He looked at her. I wasn't disappointed. She looked at the photograph, at her father's hand on the shoulder of the younger man who would become the commander who had authorized her to climb a ridge in the Mojave and change the rules of what she was allowed to be. He would have liked you, she said, quietly. He respected precision. He respected people who told the truth even when it was complicated. He told the truth when it was very complicated, Shepard said. On one occasion, that probably saved my life and definitely saved the lives of 4 other people. And that is a story for a different day. He put the photograph back in his desk. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that what I'm offering you is not charity. It's not compensation for what happened on Sultan Ridge. It is not me feeling guilty about putting you on that convoy without full disclosure. He looked at her steadily. It's what your father knew you would become 17 years before you became it. I'm just the person who happened to be in the room when you got there. She was quiet for a long time. The desert light was coming through the narrow window and laying itself across the desk in a flat, even line. And she thought about all the mornings and all the Arizona deserts she had sat in from age 7 to now, learning things she hadn't understood yet, carrying things she hadn't known what to do with yet, waiting without knowing she was waiting for the moment when the skill and the judgment and the choice all arrived at the same place at the same time. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. Let's build something. Mini climax 32 minutes. The formal designation paperwork moved faster than she expected, which told her that Odom had cleared a path for it at a level above Yuma before the board session had even finished. The military moved at 2 speeds, glacial and sudden, and when it moved suddenly, it meant someone at the top had already decided, and the process that followed was more ceremony than decision. She signed 3 documents. Shepard countersigned. A JAG representative witnessed. The whole thing took 11 minutes. When it was done, she was officially, and for the first time in naval special warfare history, a combat medic and designated marksman, operating under a dual classification that had no precedent and no established playbook, and would require her to build both from the ground up. She walked out of Shepard's office at 1438 and stood in the hallway and felt the specific weight of what had just happened settle onto her shoulders. Not a heavy weight, not a burden. More like the weight of a pack you've been fitted for, present real exactly the right size for the distance you are about to cover. Torres was at his desk at the end of the corridor. He saw her face as she came out and read it with the communicator's instinct for signal. Good or bad, he said. Different, she said. Significantly different. Good different or bad different. She thought about it. My father used to say that the good ones always feel like the same thing at first, like the ground shifted and you're not sure yet which direction is down. She paused. Good different. Torres pointed at her. I want to hear the whole story later. Later, she agreed and kept walking. Timestamp 38 minutes, audience retention hook. She went to see Alvarez. He was in the base medical ward, his left leg immobilized, and elevated an untouched tray of hospital food on the table beside him and a tablet in his hands that he was staring at without appearing to read anything on it. He looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who has been alone with his thoughts long enough that any interruption is welcome. How'd the board go? He said. No disciplinary action, she said. And something else. She sat in the chair beside his bed. They're creating a dual designation, combat medic and designated marksman. Dual role 1 operator. She paused. Me. He stared at her. There's no precedent for, I know. In the whole history of NSW, I know. He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, a complicated sequence of things, pride, and something more personal that she recognized as the specific feeling of knowing you contributed to something larger than you intended to. If you hadn't told me to show you the hip, he said, if I hadn't been grounded on that ridge, if I'd been up there instead of you, don't, she said. That's not a useful road. I know, he said. He stopped. Your shots were clean, all three. I talked to the debrief team. Clean entries, precise groupings, minimal deviation from point of aim given the conditions. He looked at her. How long since you'd fired a .50 caliber before yesterday? She thought about it honestly. 4 years. He made a sound. 4 years. And you put 3 down at 650 to 820 under fire. He shook his head slowly. What did your father do to you? He taught me, she said. Everything else was just maintenance. Maintenance, he repeated like the word was in a language he was still learning. Then quieter. I want to come back from this injury and train under your program. Whatever you build, I want to be in it. She looked at him steadily. Your hip is going to need 8 weeks minimum in 6 months of gradual return to full load bearing. I know. And when you come back, you're going to have to qualify at the same standard as everyone else. I'm not going to give you anything because of what happened out there. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I'm asking to earn it. She nodded. Then earn it. Something in his face settled into a quieter, more determined shape than she'd ever seen from him. The stubbornness was still there. It was built too deep to go anywhere, but it had reoriented. It was pointing in a different direction now. Mini-climax 44 minutes. Reeves found her at 16:15. She was in the medical bay alone, updating patient charts with the focused efficiency she brought to all documentation, not because she loved paperwork, but because the record was the continuity, and continuity was how the next person who treated these patients would know what had already been done. He came in and stood in the middle of the room, and she could feel him there without looking up, the way you feel a specific kind of weather without checking the window. She finished the line she was writing. Then she looked up. He looked different from the man who had grabbed her wrist in the armory 3 days ago. Not smaller exactly, more accurately dimensioned. Like the space around him had recalibrated to fit what he actually was rather than what he'd been performing. I've been informed of the designation, he said. Yes, sir, she said. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw did something. His hands at his sides did something. She watched him work through whatever was happening internally with the detached clinical attention she gave to all physiological responses. I want you to know, he said, and then he stopped. Started again. What I did in the armory. Grabbing you. He stopped again. The words were not coming easily, and she could see that, and she did not make it easier or harder. He exhaled. That was not how I conduct myself. I lost my composure. I want you to know I understand that. She looked at him steadily. I know you lost your composure, she said. I was there. Something flashed across his face. Not anger, closer to the specific discomfort of a man who was hoping for absolution and has instead been offered only accuracy. I'm telling you, I regret it, he said. I hear that, she said. She paused. Sir, I don't need an apology from you. I need what I need from the people I work with, is to know that in the field when the call has to be made, they're going to make it based on what's real, not on what's convenient, not on what fits the box they've put me in. She held his gaze. Yesterday, you had a medic who could have stopped the ambush in its first 3 minutes if she'd been authorized to go. Instead, she was ordered to stay with her casualties, and the ambush had 4 more minutes to develop before I went anyway. That's 4 minutes that cost us 2 vehicles and a compound fracture and a labral tear and a graze wound. She paused. That's what I need you to understand, not that you grabbed my wrist, what the grab meant in terms of what it cost. The room was very quiet. Reeves looked at her for a long moment. The performance of authority was completely gone from his face. What was left was just a man looking at what his assumptions had cost him and maybe what they'd cost other people, and sitting with the weight of that without anywhere comfortable to put it down. I understand, he said. His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Good, she said, and went back to her charts. He left without another word. She kept writing. Her hand was steady. But underneath the steadiness, she allowed herself privately and briefly to feel the specific satisfaction of having said the true thing instead of the comfortable one. Her father had told her once that the world didn't need more comfortable conversations. It needed more true ones. She agreed with him. She agreed with him about most things, even now, even 17 years later. Even after all the ways the world had tried to convince her that the things he'd taught her were too hard or too much or outside the boundaries of what she was supposed to be, he'd been right. He was almost always right. Timestamp 51 minutes twist 2. The call came at 18:02. She was eating alone in the mess, not avoiding people, just not seeking them. The specific introversion that followed large days when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. "Garrett," she said. "Petty Officer Garrett." The voice was older, measured with the quality of someone who had spent a long time saying careful things. "My name is Thomas Hendricks. I believe Commander Shepard mentioned me." She put down her fork. Thomas Hendricks, the retired Delta Sergeant Major, the man who had been at her kitchen table at 17 delivering news that made the world permanently smaller. The man who had served 11 years alongside her father and who had apparently told Shepard things that had set everything in motion. "Mr. Hendricks," she said. Her voice was even. It cost her something. "I heard what happened yesterday," he said. "I have contacts at Yuma." A pause. "I also heard about the designation." "Word travels fast," she said. "When the right people are paying attention," he said. "I wanted to call because," he stopped. She heard him adjust something, not his position, something internal. "Cole talked about you every time I saw him. Every deployment, every leave, every time we sat and had a beer and talked about things that weren't the work." Another pause. "He was prouder of you than anything he'd ever done. Prouder than any mission, any decoration, any year of service." His voice did something careful at the edges. "I thought you should hear that from someone who was there." She stared at the wall across the mess. "He never told me," she said, and she hadn't known she was going to say it until she had, and once it was out, there was no pulling it back. "No," Hendricks said. "He wouldn't. He was afraid if he told you how good you were, you'd want to follow him into the work. And he didn't want that for you, not because he didn't believe in you." He paused. "Because he believed in you too much to want you to carry what he carried." She closed her eyes, opened them. The mess was the same, the institutional tables, the overhead lights, the ambient sound of other people's conversations, and she was the same. And also not the same, and the difference between those two things was sitting in her chest like something she'd swallowed and couldn't quite metabolize. "He wrote me a letter," she said, "before that last deployment. He said the world needed people who could hold things together." "I know about the letter," Hendricks said. "He told me he wrote it. He said," a pause, "he said he hoped you'd understand someday that the two things weren't mutually exclusive, the healing and the fighting, that the best protectors had always been people who understood both." She was silent for a moment. "He could have just said that," she said, and something in her voice was not quite a laugh and not quite not a laugh. "Instead of I spent 9 years thinking I had to choose." "He was afraid," Hendricks said, simply, the way true things are simple. Even Cole Garrett was afraid of some things. He was afraid you'd make the choice to fight and get yourself killed because of him. He thought if he gave you one clear direction, you'd follow it and be safe. A pause. "He underestimated you. He knew it toward the end. He used to say you were already past him and he was just trying to keep up." Another pause. "I don't think he underestimated you on purpose. I think he loved you more than his judgment." The mess was very quiet around her. Other people's conversations had become a current she was floating in without touching. "Thank you," she said, "for calling." "There's one more thing," Hendricks said. She waited. "He left something with me. He asked me to hold it until," he paused. "He said I'd know when the time was right, when you'd found the thing he'd been training you for without either of you knowing what it was." A long pause. "I think the time is right, Petty Officer. I'd like to send it to you." "What is it?" she said. "His field notebook," Hendricks said. 30 years of range data wine calculations, shot logs, everything he ever learned about long-range precision, everything he would have taught you if he'd had more time. Another pause, and in the pause she could hear 17 years of a kept promise. He wanted you to have it when you were ready. He said you'd know what to do with it. She couldn't speak for a moment. She let the moment exist without trying to fill it. "Send it," she said. Mini-climax 59 minutes. She was back in the barracks at 2100, sitting on her bunk with the photograph in her hands when Torres knocked on the doorframe. You said later, he said. It's later. She looked at him, at his young face with its communicator's instinct for other people's frequencies, at the extra magazine still on his belt because he hadn't put it back in his locker yet. Come in, she said. He sat in the chair by the window and she told him. Not everything, some things were not his to know not yet, but enough. The designation, the program, the doctrine she was going to build. The notebook that was coming from a retired sergeant major in Arizona who had kept a promise for 17 years. Torres listened the way good communicators listen, not interrupting, not reacting visibly, just receiving. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. On the ridge, he said, when you were climbing, with the rounds coming in, what were you thinking? She'd been asked this 3 times now and had given 3 slightly different answers, each one a true part of the whole. She gave him the part that was his. I was thinking about the people in the convoy, she said, about Weston holding his jaw together in the driver's seat, about you and your extra magazine, about the crew chief with the head laceration, about Alvarez on the ground with a locked hip looking at a rifle he couldn't carry. She paused. I was thinking that somebody had to go get it, and I was the only somebody who could. Torres nodded slowly. And that was enough. That was everything, she said. That's always what it comes down to. Not what you're capable of, what you're capable of in service of. She looked at the photograph in her hands. My father taught me that. I just needed the right moment to understand it. Torres looked at the photograph. She turned it so he could see it. That's him, he said. Yeah, she said. He studied it for a moment. He looks like someone who knew what he was doing. He always did, she said. Even when he didn't, he looked like someone who did. He said confidence was data. It told the people around you whether they could afford to be scared or whether they needed to hold it together. She paused. He said the best leaders are the ones who carry the fear for everyone else, so everyone else can function. That's what you do, Torres said, quietly. Not a compliment exactly, an observation. The specific observation of someone who has watched a person in extreme conditions and taken an accurate reading. She looked at him. I'm working on it, she said. Timestamp 67 minutes. The next morning, 06:30, she was at the range. Not because she was ordered to be. Not because anything in her new designation required her to be there. Yet the formal qualification process hadn't started. The paperwork was still moving through channels. The program was still more framework than reality. She was there because she had always been there on some range somewhere for the last 17 years, doing the thing that was hers to do, and that had not changed. What had changed was that she signed into the range log under her new dual designation for the first time. The range master, a chief petty officer named Gallagher, who had been running this range for 11 years and who had the particular unimpressibility of someone who had seen everything, looked at the log entry. Looked at her. Looked back at the log. Dual classification, he said. Don't see that often. First time in NSW, she said. He looked at her for a moment with the slow, measuring look of a man reassessing something he thought he already knew. What are you shooting today, he said. 50 cal, she said, if you have a lane available. He did. He walked her to it without another word. Then at the lane he paused. Heard about Sultan Ridge, he said. Most people have, she said. Heard your wind reading was accurate to within 2 miles per hour, and your distance estimate was off by 20 meters at over 800. 20 meters at 800 is within my margin, she said. It was the same thing she'd told Shepard. She would say it the same way every time someone brought it up because it was exactly true. And she had learned from her father that the exactly true thing, said exactly the same way every time, was its own form of integrity. Gallagher looked at the lane, looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't watching for it, but it shifted. Good shooting, he said, and walked back to his station. She set up, went through the pre-fire checks with the automatic thoroughness of someone who had done them 10,000 times. Adjusted the bipod, set the optic, checked the load. Then she lay in position and looked downrange. The lane was empty, just the distance and the target and the flat, indifferent air between them. No one shooting at her, no hip-locked teammate on the ground behind her, no convoy burning in the distance. Just the pure, uncomplicated version of the thing, the distance, the calculation, the breath, the stillness. She fired. And then again. And then again, each shot went exactly where it was aimed. Not approximately, not within margin, exactly. She lay there afterward in the familiar quiet of a range after firing that specific compressed silence that follows the percussion, and she let herself feel it without analysis. The thing that was hers, the thing her father had given her, the thing she'd carried for 17 years inside a different shape, waiting for the shape to change. It had changed, and now she was going to find out what it became. She sat up, cleared the weapon, began the post-fire inspection with the same attention she'd given the pre-fire, because that was how you treated a serious instrument. Before and after both, the beginning and the end both. Her father had taught her that too. He had taught her most things, the ones that mattered, the ones that lasted. She picked up her kit and walked back toward the facility. Tomorrow the program began. Today she let herself be simply what she had always been underneath everything before the uniform and the role and the 9 years of choosing one thing over another, her father's daughter in an Arizona desert, knowing exactly what the wind was doing. 3.5 inches, at 300 yards, in 14 seconds, but not a child anymore. Something her father had been training toward without knowing it. Something the military hadn't had a name for until 48 hours ago. She walked through the gate. Behind her, the range was quiet. The desert was listening. And somewhere in Arizona, in a box in a retired sergeant major's house, a notebook full of 30 years of wind calculations and range data, and the handwritten knowledge of one of the finest shooters the Delta Force had ever produced, was being packed into an envelope with her name on it. Going home. The notebook arrived on a Tuesday. No ceremony, no announcement. A standard manila envelope sitting on her desk in the medical bay when she came in at 0630, with her name written on the front, in the careful block lettering of a man who had learned to write that way, in the field where precision and documentation was the difference between a correct supply request and a fatal one. She stood in front of her desk for a moment without touching it. Torres was at his station across the corridor, and he saw her standing there and read her stillness correctly and said nothing, which was one of the things she genuinely valued about Torres. She sat down, put both hands flat on the desk on either side of the envelope. Then she picked it up and opened it. The notebook was smaller than she expected. Olive drab cover military issue, the kind that cost $2 at any base supply store, and that her father had apparently used for 30 years of the most precise and painstakingly accumulated knowledge she had ever held in her hands. The cover was worn to softness at the corners. The spine had been reinforced with tape twice. She could see where the first tape had been replaced with a second layer at some point years into its life. The pages were dense with handwriting, diagrams, numbers, notations in the margins, corrections and addendums in slightly different ink that told the story of a mind returning to an idea and refining it. She opened to the first page. In her father's handwriting at the top, Rangelog C. Garrett, begun March 1989. She turned pages slowly. The early entries were straightforward, shot data, wind conditions, distances, adjustments, the methodical record-keeping of a young sniper, building his database of knowledge one round at a time. She recognized the cadence of it. He'd taught her to keep the same kind of log. She'd kept one for 17 years in a series of identical notebooks that were in a box under her bed. She turned to the middle of the book. The handwriting changed there. Same hand, but the entries became longer, more discursive. Less shot data, more analysis. He was working something out on the page, the relationship between mechanical precision and human judgment, the question of when the former had to defer to the latter, the problem of training someone to be accurate with a weapon while also training them to understand that accuracy was the smallest part of the skill. She read for 12 minutes without stopping. Then she found the section that stopped her completely. It was dated August 2007. She had been 19. He had been in Afghanistan on what would turn out to be his third to last deployment. The entry read, "Thinking about S today. She's getting better than I am and she doesn't know it. Took her to the Flagstaff range before I deployed and she was compensating for crosswind at 1,000 meters without being told to. Just felt it. Made the correction in her head before I could prompt her. 11 seconds. I've trained operators for 15 years, and I've never seen a natural red like hers. The question I keep coming back to is not whether she can do this work. She can. The question is what kind of person she'll be if she does. The weight of it changes you. I know what it changed me into. I don't know if I want that for her. I don't know if wanting things for her is even something I have the right to do anymore. She's 20 years from being what I am, and maybe 10 years from being better than what I am. And the only thing I know for certain is that whatever she becomes, she has to become it herself. Sloane sat very still. The mess was quiet around her. The fluorescent light hummed the same way it always hummed. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 3 minutes ago. And she was entirely different. Timestamp 10 minutes, twist 1. She went to Shepard's office at 0800. She didn't knock. She pushed the door open and stood in the doorway with a notebook in her hand, and he looked up from his desk and read her face in approximately 1 second. "Sit down," he said. "Did you know what was in it?" she said. She wasn't angry. She needed to know. "Hendricks told me it was his field notebook," Shepard said. "He didn't tell me what was in it." She crossed the room and put it open on his desk, turned to the August 2007 entry, watched him read it, watched his face as he read it. When he looked up, his expression had the quality of something that had been confirmed rather than discovered. "He knew exactly what you were," Shepard said. "He knew, and he didn't tell me," she said. "He sent me in the other direction, and he never told me he knew." "Would it have changed anything?" Shepard said, not dismissive, a real question. She thought about it honestly. Stood there in the middle of his office and actually thought about it all, 9 years of it, the private ranges and the secret training and the photograph on her bunk and the weight she'd carried that she'd thought was grief and had actually been something more complicated than grief. "No," she said, "I don't think it would have." "Then he made the right call," Shepard said. Not coldly, gently, in the particular way of someone who has lived long enough to understand that the decisions that look like withholding are sometimes the ones that protect you long enough to become what you needed to become. She picked the notebook back up, held it. "He was afraid," she said, the same thing Hendricks had told her, but it landed differently now with the handwriting in her hands. Even Cole Garrett. "Everyone is afraid of something," Shepard said. "The question is what you do while you're afraid." He paused. He kept showing up. Every deployment, every leave. He kept coming back to that range with you. He kept teaching you. He was afraid, and he did it anyway. Another pause. "Sound familiar?" She looked at him. Yeah, she thought. It sounds familiar. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. Mini-climax 15 minutes. The formal sniper qualification process began on a Wednesday and was by any standard metric not designed for someone in her position. The qualification course at UMOM was built for candidates with zero prior training. It started at the foundation's work through progressively complex scenarios and culminated in a field evaluation that most candidates took 3 attempts to pass. The average completion time was 11 weeks. Chief Gallagher ran it. He had run it for 8 years. He had washed out candidates who didn't make standard and passed candidates who barely made it and treated both outcomes with the same flat professionalism. He did not give people things they hadn't earned, and he did not make things easier because of who someone was or what someone had done. He also did not waste time. On her first day of qualification, he walked her through the Foundations module, which was designed to take 3 sessions, and asked her questions as they went. She answered them. He asked more precise questions. She answered those too. He asked her to demonstrate wind reading at the range. She demonstrated it. He asked her to calculate a come-up at 900 meters with a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind from the northwest. She calculated it in her head in 8 seconds. He looked at her for a long moment. "How long have you been doing this?" he said. "Since I was 11, she said. He nodded slowly, with the expression of a man revising an estimate significantly upward. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "We're skipping to week 4. She came back the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Torres asked her at the end of the first week how it was going. "Gallagher told me this morning that I have the cleanest prone position he's seen from a candidate in 6 years, she said. "Is that good?" Torres said. From Gallagher, she said, "That's a standing ovation." Timestamp 20 minutes. Alvarez called her on day 9 of qualification. She was in the medical bay doing her morning patient rounds. The crew chief had been discharged 4 days ago. The driver with the compound fracture had come back to the unit on light duty and was driving everyone mildly insane with his cheerfulness about it. The operator with the perforated eardrum had been cleared for full duty, and had come by the bay to say thank you in the specific, inarticulate way of people who feel more than they can express. She picked up on the second ring. "How's the hip?" she said. "Week 3 of recovery," he said. "Physical therapy is—" He paused. "It's humbling." "Humbling is good," she said. "Humbling means you're taking it seriously." "I'm taking it very seriously," he said. "I have a lot of time to take things seriously. I've been thinking." He paused again, the pause of someone who has spent weeks alone with a thought and is now deciding how to hand it to another person. "About what you said in the hospital, about earning it." "I remember," she said. "I've been watching my career a certain way," he said. "Like the mission was the thing, the skill was in service of the mission, and that was the whole equation. Get there, do the thing, come back, repeat." Another pause. "But watching you on Sultan Ridge, what you were doing while I was on the ground, you weren't just, you were doing both things at the same time. You had my position, my status, the convoy status, the threat positions, the wind data all running simultaneously, and you were still making individual calls on each one." His voice did something careful. "That's not just skill, that's a different way of seeing." "It's what he taught me," she said. "My father. He said the rifle is the last resort. Everything before the shot is the real work, understanding the full picture, knowing what the shot costs, knowing what not shooting costs, holding all of it at once, and making the call that serves the most people." She paused. "He called it total situational awareness. I call it just paying attention." "I want to learn that," Alvarez said. "Whatever you're building, I want to learn that." "Then get your hip right," she said, "and come back ready to work." "Yes, ma'am," he said. She almost said, "Don't call me ma'am," which was what she always said when people called her ma'am. And then she realized she'd let it go. It didn't bother her the way it used to. Something had shifted in how she carried the authority, and the shift meant she didn't need to deflect it anymore. "Alvarez," she said before he hung up. "Yeah. Your instinct to go on that mission even with the injury, I'm not going to tell you it was wrong," she said. "I think it came from the right place. I think you were trying to protect your team. I just need you to know that protecting your team sometimes means telling them the truth about what you've got and what you don't." She paused. "The truth is always better equipment than the performance of being fine." A long pause on his end. "I'm going to write that down," he said. "Good," she said. "Tell your physical therapist I said hello." Mini climax 28 minutes. Audience retention hook. She passed formal qualification in 6 weeks. Gallagher handed her the documentation at 1600 on a Friday with the same flat professionalism he brought to everything, and then he did something she had not seen him do in the 3 weeks she'd been working with him. He held out his hand. She shook it. "Your father would know what this means," he said. She looked at him. "You knew him?" "Briefly," Gallagher said. 2002, joint training exercise. He spent 20 minutes at my lane giving me unsolicited feedback on my prone position, and he was completely right about everything, and I didn't like him for about 6 months afterward." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Then I came around." She laughed. It came out before she could curate it, and it was a real laugh, not the controlled exhale she usually permitted herself in professional spaces, but a genuine full sound surprised out of her by the specific image of her 34-year-old father delivering unsolicited feedback to a range instructor who didn't want it. "That sounds exactly like him," she said. "I figured," Gallagher said. "Go file your paperwork." She did. Timestamp 34 minutes, twist 2. The doctrine development began on a Monday morning in a conference room that had been cleared of its usual furniture and rearranged with whiteboards and a long table because Sloan had asked for it that way, and Shepard had made it happen without asking why. There were 4 people in the room: Sloan, Shepard, a curriculum development specialist from the training command named Lieutenant Yi, who was 29 years old and had the nervous precision of someone who was very good at their job and was aware they were in a room with people who were operating at a different altitude. And Torres, who was there because Sloan had asked for him specifically, on the grounds that the person who communicated the doctrine to future students needed to be in the room while it was being built. Torres had looked surprised when she told him. She told him to get over it and show up on Monday. He'd showed up 15 minutes early. She started with a question. "When does a medic become a shooter?" she said. Not rhetorical. She wrote it on the whiteboard in large letters and turned around and looked at the room. "That's the first question the doctrine has to answer." not how, when. Yi opened his curriculum notebook. Standard doctrine would establish a decision tree with, not a decision tree, she said. A decision tree is for people who don't trust their judgment. We're training people to trust their judgment. The tree is what you use when the judgment isn't there yet. She paused. The doctrine has to build the judgment. The decision tree is training wheels. We're not building training wheels. Yi looked at his notebook, looked at her, closed the notebook. All right, he said. How do you build judgment? You teach people to see big I see, she said. Everything. Simultaneously. Casualties, threats, terrain, time resources, personnel status. You train them to hold the whole picture at once and make calls from the picture, not from the checklist. She picked up the marker. My father had a phrase for it. He called it the sovereign view. The view from above your own position. The view that sees what everyone on the ground can't. Shepard from the back of the room said nothing, but she could feel him listening. The second thing you teach, she said, is cost accounting. Every decision in a dual role has a cost on both sides of the ledger. If you shoot, you're not treating. If you treat, you're not shooting. The doctrine has to teach operators to calculate that cost in real time, under pressure, with incomplete information, and make the call that saves the most lives overall, not the call that feels most comfortable, not the call that fits the job description. She wrote on the whiteboard, cost accounting under pressure. And the third thing, she said, she stopped, looked at the board for a moment. The third thing is the hardest thing to teach and the most important. She wrote it the weight. You teach them to carry the weight of the decision without being crushed by it and without pretending it isn't there. The shot you take, the patient you left to take it, the call you made with 30% of the information you wanted. She turned around. You don't put it down, you don't pretend it away. You carry it, and you let it make you more precise, not less. That's the difference between a person who can do this work and a person who can do it once and then can't do it again. The room was quiet. Torres was writing furiously. Yi was looking at her with an expression that had moved a considerable distance from nervous precision to something closer to genuine attention. Shepard said from the back, that's the first 3 modules. She looked at him. Sovereign view, cost accounting, the weight. He nodded at the board. That's your framework. Build from there. She turned back to the board and wrote all 3 down in a column, and then they built. Mini climax 42 minutes. 3 weeks into doctrine development, Reeves came to a session. She hadn't invited him. Shepard had quietly, without telling her in advance. She found out when Reeves appeared in the doorway of the conference room at 08:30, and she looked up from the whiteboard and understood immediately what was happening and made the decision in approximately 2 seconds that she was not going to let it derail the session. Lieutenant Commander, she said, take a seat. We're on Module 4 Field Triage Prioritization in Dual Role Scenarios. You're welcome to observe. He sat. He didn't speak for the first 40 minutes. He watched her work through the module with Yi and Torres building the decision matrix for triage calls, when the medic is also the active shooter, the layered protocol for assessing who waits and who can't wait, and how you make that assessment with one eye on the threat picture. At minute 43, he said, what about psychological load? The accumulated effect of making those dual calls across a deployment. The room looked at him. She looked at him, studied his face for a moment. The question was real. He wasn't performing engagement. He was actually asking. Module 7, she said, Resilience Architecture under Compound Operational Stress. She paused. It's the module I'm least satisfied with so far. The existing psychological resilience training for NSW isn't designed for dual-role cognitive load. I'm still working on how to adapt it. Reeves was quiet for a moment. I did a rotation with Marine Recon in 2014, he said. They had a stress inoculation program that was specifically designed for high-frequency compound decision-making. I can pull the curriculum documentation if it's useful. She looked at him for a moment, the man who had grabbed her wrist, the man who had told her she was worth nothing more than wiping blood off floors, sitting in her doctrine session, offering to pull curriculum documentation. People she had learned were not the same thing at every moment of their lives. That didn't excuse the moments that needed accounting for, but it was true regardless. Pull it, she said. Send it to Yi. He nodded, said nothing else. went back to watching. At the end of the session, when the room was clearing, he stopped at the door. "Garrett," he said. She looked at him. "This is good work," he said. "Flat. No performance in it. Just the statement offered because it was true, and he had apparently decided that the true thing was what he was going to give her." "Thank you," she said. "Same flat register. Send the recon documentation by end of week." He left. Torres appeared beside her as she erased the whiteboard. "Was that, yes," she said. "Is he?" "I think so," she said. "Maybe." She paused. "People are complicated. Give them room to be complicated." Torres considered this. "You get that from your father, too." "I get almost everything from my father," she said. "The rest I got from 9 years of keeping people alive in situations that had no good options." Timestamp 51 minutes. The program's first candidates were announced 6 weeks after doctrine development began. 8 operators, selected through a process Sloan had designed herself, not purely on shooting ability, not purely on medical performance, but on a composite assessment of judgment, under pressure, situational awareness, and the specific combination of precision and empathy that she had come to understand through 31 years of living inside the version of it her father had given her, was the actual prerequisite for this work. 6 men, 2 women, ages 24 to 31, from different rates, different backgrounds, different regions of the country, and different ways of moving through the world. They had been told they were selected for a new program, but not specifically what the program was, because she had requested that information be held back until the first session. She wanted to see their faces when they found out. She wanted to read the room before she built anything else in it. She walked into the training room at 800 on a Monday with her qualification documentation on her belt and her medical kit on her left side, and her father's notebook, which she had been reading every evening for 6 weeks, adding her own margin notations in a different ink, building her own layer of knowledge on top of his, in the bag over her shoulder. 8 people sat in front of her, waiting. She looked at them for a moment, all of them looking back. The specific attention of people who have been told this matters without being told why. "My name is Petty Officer First Class Sloan Garrett," she said. "I am a combat medic and a designated marksman. Dual classification, the first in naval special warfare history. This program is called Integrated Combat Medicine. You are the first 8 people who have ever gone through it, which means everything we do in this room is being built as we go." She paused. "That's not a weakness. That's what all the important things are built as we go from the best understanding available by the people who are present." She let that sit for a moment. "I'm going to tell you one thing before we start," she said. "The hardest weapon you will ever carry is not the rifle, and it is not the medical kit. It is the judgment that decides which one you reach for and when. That judgment cannot be downloaded. It cannot be certified. It has to be built, choice by choice, scenario by scenario, through enough repetition that when the moment comes and there is no time and there are no good options, your judgment moves before your fear does." You see, she looked at them steadily. "That is what this program builds, not skill, judgment. The skill is in service of the judgment, never the other way around." One of the candidates, young from the look of her, barely 24, with the specific alert stillness of someone who has been waiting their whole life for a room exactly like this one, raised her hand. "Petty Officer Garrett," she said, "how do you know the difference in the moment? How do you know when it's time to treat and when it's time to shoot?" The room was very quiet. Sloan looked at her, saw something in the young woman's face that was not quite a mirror. She was her own person, her own history, her own story, moving through the world, but close enough to something familiar that it landed in a specific way. "You ask yourself one question," she said. "Who needs protecting right now, and what does protecting them require from me?" She paused. "If the answer is medicine, you open the kit. If the answer is fire suppression, you reach for the weapon. If the answer is both, you make the fastest, accurate decision you can make, and you live with the cost of what you chose." Another pause. "The question doesn't change. The answer changes every time. And you have to be willing to give a different answer every time the situation demands it, without being attached to the answer you gave last time." The candidate nodded, not satisfied exactly. The answer was too large to be satisfying in a single sitting, but receiving it, taking it in. "That's what we're going to build," Sloan said. "For the next 12 weeks. We're going to run you through every version of that question I know how to construct And some versions I'm going to construct while we're in them together, because the real ones never come in the version you prepared for. She looked at all of them. Any questions before we start? Nobody raised a hand. Good, she said. Let's go, mini climax 60 minutes. At the end of the first day, she sat in her car in the parking lot outside the training facility for 12 minutes. Not because she was overwhelmed, because she had learned from her father that the moments you don't stop to receive are the moments that move through you without leaving what they were supposed to leave. He had been a man who stopped, who sat, who looked at the photograph, his photographs, the ones she'd never seen, because they were his private record, and let the day land before he moved into the next one. She was her father's daughter. She had learned to stop. She thought about the 8 people in that room, about the young candidate with the alert stillness who had asked the right question without knowing it was the right question, about the 6 weeks of doctrine work that had preceded this morning, about Gallagher handing her qualification documentation with an outstretched hand and a story about her father's unsolicited feedback, about Hendricks' voice on the phone carrying a 17-year-old promise across the line, about Alvarez in a hospital bed choosing to earn something, about Torres with his extra magazine, about Weston holding his jaw together in the driver's seat, about Reeves of all people sitting in her doctrine session offering to pull Marine Recon curriculum documentation, about Shepard in the armory watching her look at a rifle like she already knew it, about a letter she'd received at 22 from a man who'd been killed in a mountain province telling her the world needed people who could hold things together. She took out the photograph, her father at 34, the desert, the long shadows. She looked at it for a long time. I understand now, she said quietly, what you were trying to tell me. She paused. You were right about most of it. Another pause. But I think you were wrong about one thing. I don't think you had to choose either. I think if you'd let yourself be both the healer and the fighter, you might have been even better at both. She stopped. I'm going to find out, on your behalf. She put the photograph away, started the car. Timestamp 67 minutes, final twist. 6 weeks into the program, Torres came to her office with a piece of paper. She was editing Module 6, the cost accounting scenarios, and she looked up when he came in and read his face before he spoke. Torres's face was a communication instrument, and right now it was communicating something that was both good and large and slightly overwhelming. What? She said. Admiral Odom's office just sent this, he said. He put the paper on her desk. She read it. Naval Special Warfare Command was formally adopting the Integrated Combat Medicine Framework as an official training program. Not a pilot, not a trial. Permanent adoption with resources, with a dedicated training facility, with a mandate to develop the program across 3 NSW units over the following 18 months. The program was to be named in the official record as the Garrett Cole Doctrine. Her name and her father's. Together. She read it twice. Then she put it down on her desk and looked at the wall for a moment. Torres was watching her. You okay, he said. Yes, she said, and she meant it completely. She meant it in a way that was bigger than the word, bigger than the moment, reaching back through 9 years and 22 years, and the whole length of a life that had been moving toward this point without knowing it. He's in it, she said. They put his name in it. Yeah, Torres said, quietly. They did. She thought about what Hendricks had told her, that her father had known, that he'd been watching her become something he couldn't name yet, and that he'd kept the notebook for her until she was ready, that he'd been afraid for her and had done the work anyway, that he'd loved her more than his judgment. She thought about what Shepard had said in the armory in the very beginning, when she was standing in front of the Barrett's case with her back to him and her shoulders tightened against what she was feeling. You look at that rifle like you know it. She did know it. She had always known it. She had just needed the right question to be asked, and the right moment to answer, and the right people to be present when she did. That was what her father had understood, and what she understood now. You cannot give someone their destiny. You can only give them the tools and the values and the love, and then step back and trust that they will find it when the moment arrives. He had given her the tools. He had given her the values. He had given her the love. The moment had arrived, and she had not missed it. Final mini climax, 74 minutes. The last class of the day was at 1600. She walked in with a notebook under her arm. She had brought it to every session since it arrived, not as a prop, not for display. She used it. The data in it was still valid, the wind calculations still accurate, the principles still sound. 30 years of field work in olive drab covers, and every word of it still true. The 8 candidates stood when she came in. "Sit," she said. "We're doing live scenarios today. No decision trees, no checklists, no prepared answers. I'm going to put you in a situation and you're going to make a call, and then we're going to talk about the call and what it cost and what it protected." She looked at them. "Any of you uncomfortable with that?" Nobody said yes. "Good," she said. "The ones who say no when they're actually uncomfortable are the ones I have to watch. The honest ones are the ones I can build." She walked to the front of the room and opened the notebook to a page she'd marked the night before. A range entry from September 2003. Her father's handwriting, mission precept. "The purpose of the shot is never the shot. The purpose of the shot is what the shot makes possible. If you cannot answer what the shot makes possible, you are not ready to take it." She read it aloud. The room was quiet. That, she said, is the foundation of everything we're going to do today. Everything we do in this program. Everything I'm going to ask of you for the next 12 weeks. She closed the notebook. The purpose of the skill is not the skill. The purpose of the skill is what the skill makes possible. Keep that question with you. In the scenarios in the field and every decision you make from this point forward. She looked at each of them in turn. What does this make possible? That's the question. Always. She put the notebook on the table at the front of the room. Her father's 30 years and her 17 years, in the 6 weeks of doctrine and the 9 years before it, in the childhood in the Arizona desert, in the letter, and the photograph, and the 3 shots on a ridge in the Mojave, and Hendricks' voice on the phone, and all of it distilled into a single olive drab cover sitting on a table in a training room in Yuma. "Let's go," she said, and they went. And the thing that had been built across 30 years and 2 lives and 1 unbroken line of love and discipline and the fierce, stubborn refusal to let the important things die, that thing was now being handed to 8 more people, and through them to every person they would protect, and through those people, to everyone those lives would touch. That was what the shot made possible. Not the 3 on Sultan Ridge. This one. The one that never stopped firing. Sloan Garrett took her place at the front of the room, her father's notebook on the table beside her, and 17 people's lives behind her, and 8 more people's futures in front of her. And she began. She was exactly where she had always been going. She had just needed the whole journey to understand it.